So, hello everyone. My name is Stefan. I'm speaking to you from Hamburg in Germany. And originally I'm a software developer, but in the last couple of years, my focus has a bit shifted towards domain-driven design, towards requirements, towards business process modeling, collaborative modeling, and I do a lot of training and consulting in that area. Now, I was supposed to give this talk together with my colleague and friend Henning, and unfortunately there was a little issue and he couldn't make it today. So I'm sorry if you expected fancy t-shirts and sweaters with funny stuff on them. I cannot provide that. You have to make do with this boring shirt of mine. Henning, that's his specialty. Cool. So if you have questions during a talk, please use the chat in WebEx. I think that's the easiest way to ask you questions. There will be plenty of time for questions. Actually, I plan to take some questions in the middle of the presentation because then we're going to switch a little bit and then some more questions in the end. And if later on after the talk you still have some questions that remain open, you can reach me in Slack, of course. So I was once told that a great talk should be about one idea. So I thought I could make a really excellent talk if I make it about two ideas. It's twice as good then, right? So the first idea that I want to talk with you about is I want to introduce you to domain storytelling as an additional tool for your modeling toolbox. And domain storytelling helps to reveal the secrets of your domain by showing how people and software systems work together. Because often we have this gap here between domain experts and software experts, developers, the whole development team. And to build good business software, we need to bridge that gap and establish a common shared understanding of the domain and the domain language. And the second idea is that, in my experience, the boundaries for software systems should be aligned with the boundaries that we find in our domain. That means before we talk about technology like building microservices or modules in our monolith and architecture and that, first we should understand the domain, find the boundaries there, and model our software boundaries after the boundaries we find in the domain. And Henning and I have been using domain storytelling for several years now to facilitate conversations with our domain experts to extract the domain knowledge and understand domains. And I think what better way of sharing is there than by telling you a story. So I'm going to tell you a story now about maps and about this container. And later on, then I will explain how domain storytelling comes into play. So let's assume this container here is shipped on one of these big container ships, let's say all the way from Shanghai in China to Hamburg in Germany. So this ship goes halfway around the world and everything is fine. But actually, when you reach the Northern Sea in Germany, you will realize that there's a little bit of a problem here. So Hamburg has a seaport, but it's not located at the sea. I'm Austrian. I didn't know that at first when I moved here. So the Londoners in the audience might have similar experience. So Hamburg has a seaport at a river, the River Elbe. So if you look at the port, it becomes quite clear that compared to a port in the open sea, a river port is, first of all, it's quite shallow. It's not very deep. There's not a lot of water under the keel. And then it's pretty crowded. So when you think, how do these big container ships fit in there? You say, well, there's no way that is possible. But as a matter of fact, it is. So how does that work? How is it made possible? And it's all thanks to the people who work here. That's the nautical center. And by the looks of it, you might think this is the tower of an airport. And actually, it serves quite a similar purpose. It coordinates all the incoming and outgoing ships and plans the ship maneuvers so they can navigate through the harbor. You see the little radar on top and the big windows overlooking the harbor area. So that's basically the tower, but for the port. And the people who work there, they are navigating officers, and they use these big maps, very colorful pieces of paper. And if we zoom in a little bit, we see all these colors are actually numbers. And these numbers, they represent depths. So every number is a depth at a given point. Where do they come from? Well, the port maintains its own infrastructure, so-called sounding ships. They sound the port and send all the data to this building, because there's a different department here. That's the cartography department, and they actually create those maps. And then once the navigating officers have those maps, they can plan the maneuvers, and they do that by using cardboard cutouts, so-called ship silhouettes, and they place them on the map and kind of move and turn on the map and see, can the ship still pass this area? Is the water too shale? Is there enough water under the keel? So of course you might say, well, it's 2021, isn't there an app for that? Yes, there is, and actually there has been for quite some years now. And here you see it, because that's what Henning and my colleagues built. So actually the picture shows both the old paper-based tools on top, and the new software tool, then new software tool on the bottom, and it runs on a big touch screen. And now you can use digital ship silhouettes to do the maneuver planning. So let's have a look at how domain storytelling helped us understand this interesting domain. So this is how we did it. Imagine you are with me in a post-corona scenario, or maybe a pre-corona scenario, in a meeting room. And here is a nice big empty whiteboard in front of us. And with us are also domain experts, namely cartographers and navigating officers. And I'm the moderator, and I want to learn how this maneuver planning works. So I asked them, please tell me how maneuver planning works. I have no idea yet, because we're new to this domain. And before we get into all the details, let's start with a big picture. So first an overview, and later we dive deeper. So then a navigating officer might say, well, the first thing that happens is ship captains, they ask us for a route on the radio, and then I put the ship silhouette on the depth map, and that's where I stop them. Say, okay, ship silhouette, depth map, I have no idea what that stuff is. So how does this come into play? And then the cartographer might say, well, this is actually something that I can contribute. So we make a little space on the whiteboard, move stuff around. And then the cartographer says, well, you know, these depth maps, it all starts with sounding ships, and they measure depths and send us that raw depth data, which then we take and we calculate the contours, or those little lines that you saw on the map, and the minimum depths. And that's what we use to draw the depth map. Then we send it over to the navigating officers. And then usually I would say, okay, it's very interesting. So you do this like once a year, or how often is it done? And then they say, well, basically, you know, the river always carries some sediments, and the depths are constantly changing. So basically some parts of the map are updated every day. This is basically a daily activity. And then the navigating officer says, well, and this is what I need to actually take the call from the captain. So they ask me for the route, and then I put the ship silhouette on the depth map. But this ship silhouette, where does that come from? So I would wonder, like, I would ask, do you really cut out a new ship silhouette for every ship that is approaching? They say, no. Actually, it's not even that often, because, you know, ships, they don't just come once to the port. They have fixed routes, and they come every few weeks or so. Plus, ships are built in classes, so there are 12 ships in the same class, for example, with the same dimensions. So actually, it's a reasonable assumption to say we have a fitting silhouette available and just take it out. So we decided here not to model the part where they cut out the ship silhouette. So we just assume here a fitting silhouette, and then you put it on the depth map, and then you move and turn it to find the route, and that's what you then discuss with the ship's captain. Of course, this is a simplification here. In reality, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but still big pictures about this level of granularity. So now I will explain you what you just saw, and after that I will take some questions. So if there are some questions open, we'll cover that before we go on to finding the boundaries. So the first thing that you've probably noticed is that I used a pictographic language to model the domain. And that language is made of certain types of words. So we have actors. Those are the active people or systems in the story. They do something. They initiate activities. Then we have work objects, the passive things that you work with. And we have activities depicted as arrows. And we have some textual annotations. And actually, it's not just a pictographic language. We label the icons to give them a concrete meaning. So we have a cartographer and a depth map and an activity draws. And if we take a closer look at the actors, it's not just one symbol. There are actually several symbols that can be used for actors. So typically, we distinguish between a person, a group of people, systems. And in the story that I showed you, there was a ship, the sounding ship that appeared as an actor. So what we do is we adapt the icon set to the domain. So we have a rich visual language that represents concept of that domain. And we do that not just for the actors, we do that also for the work. So for example, in the same domain story, I can have the word route appear several times. If someone asks for a route on the radio, I'll have a little walkie-talkie or a phone symbol for that. And if it's about, for example, writing down a route, then it's a document symbol that I use. So this can be the same story, but depending on where I am in the story, the same thing might be represented in a different way. And that's what we use to build our sentences. And the idea is that a sentence in a pictographic language kind of reads almost the same like a sentence in a natural language. So the navigating officer discusses the route with the captain. To tell a story, of course, we need more than one sentence, right? So what we do is we append sentences, and then still numbers come into play, because they show us in which sequence I have to read the sentences to make up the story. Now, this is quite different from process modeling approaches that you might be familiar with that look more like that. This is a BPNN example, could also be a UML activity diagram or EPK or some sort of flowchart-like approach, where you have this little, well, it's an X, that's a gateway, where you have notation for different cases. We don't have that in domain storytelling. There's no if, there's no or, there's no gateway, because what we do is, instead of showing all the possible things that could happen, we show one concrete path, one concrete story of what actually happens. So that's a big difference here, and that's why we don't need any ifs or gateways. So the idea is that you can actually learn a lot from good examples, and you learn more from examples than from premature and therefore bad abstractions. Now, don't get me wrong, if we build software, sooner or later we have to build abstractions. But I think it's a good idea to first understand the domain and abstract from something. Often we as software developers start with the abstraction and never really take a good look at the concrete thing. So this is something that I've learned and works very well with those domain stories. Very briefly, I want to talk about scope, in particular about the granularity of a story, because it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So this picture is actually from a different example. It's not from the port. It's from a movie theater, cinema. And in the left picture, you see a moviegoer in the center, and she buys a ticket from the cashier. That's one activity, one step in the story. In the right picture, you see this one step kind of zoomed in, blown up into a whole story on its own. So here it's like, I think, 9 activities, 9 steps about choosing where you want to sit and paying and so on until you finally receive a ticket. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. You can have coarse-grained stories, fine-grained stories, and everything in the middle. The story that I showed you from the harbor was, of course, more coarse-grained story. What I couldn't really show you, because I didn't have any domain experts here with me in my living room, is that this is not just a language or a pictographic notation. It's actually also a workshop format. So it's really, really crucial to assemble a group of people similar to this one, a diverse group of people with different backgrounds that can contribute to the story. You want something like here, people who are really the experts for the domain, who really know how it is out there. You don't want any people who just know the domain from hearsay. You want the people who have the real first-hand experience. And then the language leads or guides through the workshop. So what we want to have is vivid conversations, people that want to learn something, the people who can teach something, but also often the domain experts themselves have interesting conversations because they're not always together in these groups and not always get to exchange ideas and thoughts with each other. So that's something that they also benefit from. And what I as a moderator do is I try to move the storytelling forward by asking questions like, what's next? Where do you get this information from? How do you make this decision? How do you know that you have to do this now? So all these questions move the story forward. And then I am very careful to really listen to the domain expert's language and not make up my own terms for it. So I repeat stuff, but I'm not really paraphrasing. And I do that in two ways. Of course, verbally. So if they told me something, I repeat it, but also I do it visually with the pictographic language. So for this workshop format to work, it's really important that everyone can see what I, as the moderator, am modeling. And not just the finished product or finished domain story a week later in form of a Word document. No, everyone needs to see the story modeled as it progresses. Everyone needs to see the whiteboard or whatever tool you're using. So this is really important because then you have a visual feedback channel and it's really easy for people to point out, no, this arrow with the 3 on it, that doesn't work that way. It should be the other way around, or we're missing a step here. So that makes it really easy for people to say if something is wrong or missing. Now you can use a whiteboard and draw on it. I'm really bad at drawing, unfortunately. So what I did is I'm lazy also. I made my little whiteboard kit. Actually, on the domain storytelling website, there's a template that you can download. So choose icons that fit to your domain, and then I printed them and had them laminated and glued little magnets on the back, and then have a reusable kit to speed up modeling if you want to do it on a whiteboard. Henning is a big fan. He's better at hand drawing. He's a big fan of those smart boards and stuff like that. Also with his tablet. If you use a tablet, of course, connect it to a projector, or in a remote setting, share the screen. Same is true if you use, this is, for example, Draw.io or any other general purpose modeling tool. Always the moderator who draws the model should share the screen with everyone else in the Zoom call or in the WebEx call. You can use whatever tool you like. Some are more clumsy than others. And of course, the best tool is the one that you build on your own, because everything else was not invented here. So a while ago, we started our little open source project with a modeling tool that supports this method. And one of the nice things is that on the top right corner, you see a little play button. So what that does is if you have a story with many sentences,
can be hard to read. So this play button plays the story like one step at a time, and then it gives you the chance to read it. So those some of the little things that are interesting. Okay, so that was an overview, a short intro to domain storytelling. That would have been the part where I'll look for questions in the chat concerning the method. But now, of course, the chat is gone. So if there are any questions about the method as such, please post them and I will get to them in the end. But now I think I should switch to the second idea that I'm trying to tell you, I'm trying to convey to you, and that is how to use that method for finding boundaries. So for that, we go back to where we started, to our domain experts and their activities. Because in Henning's and my mind, a realization happened some time ago, and that is that we think that activities actually shape the boundaries in the domain. And they are a good, solid base for later deriving the system design and the architecture from those boundaries. So what do I mean by that? If you look at some of the activities of our navigating officers, like moving and turning the ship silhouette or discussing the route with the captain, well, if I ask a navigating officer, do these activities belong together? They say, yeah, that's all about maneuver simulation. So this is very closely related with other stuff that they do, like handling the depth maps and other activities that are not in the picture. They are not that closely related. They are more like supporting activities, but it's not really maneuver simulation. So what belongs together and what doesn't isn't our decision as developers or as moderators or modelers or architects. So it's actually something that should be discussed with the domain experts. So when I said activities shape boundaries, actually what I meant is activities that belong together shape boundaries, and be more precise, activities that belong together from a domain expert's perspective shape those boundaries. I will try to explain it to you in a little more depth by looking again at this picture here. If you look at it from the layout, actually you can see that we already kind of intuitively put some activities more closer together than others. So you see some activities in the top right part, and then you see the left and lower part. So already the layout tells us something. And what we can see is, well, there are two candidates here. So again, if we ask the people who are active or working in this area, our experts, they would say, well, this one part here, that's what we call maneuver planning. And the other part here is what we call cartography. And they are actually connected with through the depth map. So the depth map is a result from the cartography and then passed on to maneuver planning. So that's what connects them. But as you can see, it's a one-way flow of information. So that would be an interesting question to ask. Is there actually a way back from maneuver planning to cartography? Is it like a two-way exchange? Then maybe the boundaries would be different. But if it's actually just a one-way information flow, like we saw here, that's a good indicator that these things are actually separated, bounded parts of the domain, and that we have found two candidates for boundaries here. Now that's one indicator. I'm going to give you a couple more. For example, if you look at the language, the word ship appears several times in the story. Different actors say ship, but do they really mean the same? So if I would have been naive and have no idea about the domain, I could have modeled all those words that the domain experts say and mean ship as one icon ship. And then the domain experts would have screamed and shouted at me because it doesn't make any sense. Because when a cartographer says ship, they probably mean the sounding ship, and it has nothing to do with the container ship that the navigating officer talks about. So they are completely separate things. By accident, they are all ships or called ship, but they cannot be mapped to the same thing. So differences in language are also very important for finding boundaries. And another indicator that I want to show you is hidden in the top left corner. Can you see it? It is about the frequency, or let's say the trigger of activities. So all this stuff here happens more or less on a daily basis. So they know which part of the harbor needs to be sounded again because it hasn't been sounded in some time, and then you do it again and update the maps and so on. Whereas the other part, well, it also happens more or less on a daily basis, but it has a different trigger. The captain asks for a route, so something has happened here. So different triggers like time-based or on-demand or request-based, those are also indicators that things might be separated into different subdomains. Now, it's not always that easy. So, for example, down here, you see actually this could be, maybe these are two different parts of the domain, sounding and cartography. There's even one of the indicators that I showed you before, because there's a one-way information flow sending raw depth to the cartographers. So if we were naive, and from the looks of it, we could say, those are two subdomains. But actually, to make this decision, we would need a bit more information, probably more domain stories. And we could even use some other techniques that help us with finding boundaries. So if some of you are familiar with event storming, that's something I use too. There are business capabilities. That's also very interesting and can give you insights into what belongs together and what doesn't. So if someone of you saw Trond's talk yesterday, talked also about that. So it's a very challenging thing to find good boundaries if you later want to build software within those boundaries. So if you make mistakes there, they can be very costly because it will affect how teams work together and how well the software can be built and maintained. So it really pays off to use several different techniques if you have to. And we tend to use domain storytelling, especially when it's a highly cooperative process. If it's more like time-based and like status changes, stuff like that, then it can be interesting to use event storming to find boundaries. And actually, I have clients where we use all of that, and then from those different sources of information, we kind of puzzle together our picture of the boundaries in the domain. Now, those of you who are familiar with domain-driven design might have guessed it already when I talk about boundaries. Well, what I really mean is, in a domain-driven design sense, is of course the term bounded context, where we too have this idea that bounded context, so the boundaries around the software should match to the boundaries in the domain and should be aligned with each other, ideally. So, of course, what I just told you is basically strategic domain-driven design with bounded contexts. And domain storytelling is one of the tools that you can use to achieve that. Now, what I showed you in this talk was two things. First, I introduced you to domain storytelling in general. You can use it to explore a domain, get familiar with a domain, learn the domain language. Sometimes it's also really useful if you have a very old system, for example, and the actual domain language got lost because domain experts, well, they don't speak the domain language anymore. They speak some technical language that they learn from using the systems. Then it can help to actually uncover and dig up the lost domain language and finally give them a language again. So that's something this technique is also good for. And then, of course, finding boundaries. But there's more that you can use it, like working with requirements, deriving requirements from business processes, or designing new processes. But of course, I cannot fit all into one talk. So instead, I hope I could get you interested in the topic. And if you want to read about it, there's an ebook available that Henning and I wrote. It's available on LeanPub. And of course, because you are such nice people and bared with me even after losing the audio connection, there's a discount for you. I will post this in Slack after the talk, so you don't have to type it. You can just click it. And I guess this is the only slide anyway that you need to remember, because all the links are there. So there's the website. Slides will go up on Speaker Deck. Yeah, and I guess that's all that I wanted to tell you. And now we still have ample of time for questions, and at least one question I can already see here. So if some more questions are on your mind, please post them into the chat. And the first question that I see here is, it's hi Trond. It's from Trond. Would not basing the boundaries on the user perspective lead to boundaries different from the business domain's capabilities? Not sure that was the point you made, just checking. Well, I think part of the answer I already gave, because I said actually you can use both for finding boundaries. In most of the clients that I work with, they don't actually have business capabilities yet, or haven't thought about that. Now one or two actually started with business capabilities, so I guess we'll get some more experience how to combine these techniques. And yeah, you said yes, you did. Yeah. So yeah, in short, I think it's not a problem per se if, let's say, you find different possible boundaries with different techniques. Most of the time, actually, they align pretty well. But those times where it doesn't align, well, this is where you need to dig deeper. And I think it's actually an advantage if you have different tools in your toolbox and can find or cover boundaries with different tools, because it gives you more options. Yeah. So another question is from Adam. We try and talk to domain experts, but sometimes are presented with proxies which approximate or guess domain expertise. Do you have advice about how to move to real experts other than just do it? Yeah. Well, that's of course an organizational thing, or can be. So, for example, what we do a lot is well, now it's Corona time, so it could be difficult to actually do that. But we try to go where the domain experts are. So we don't just meet in a meeting room in the main building. So if they are out on the field, and in fall, it was when it was not so difficult with the Corona situation in Germany, I went to the harbor area where they excavate the sand from the river and put it there, and talk to people who drive baggers and excavators and stuff like that. So we go to where the work is, basically. And that helps to get in touch with the real people, because the proxies usually don't go there. They gave me a hard hat, and I had to wear like good boots. I took my hiking boots. Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, so that definitely helps. And yeah, it's tricky. I don't think I can give general advice on that. But sometimes it means you have to go around like management or middle management, because that's kind of dangerous. If you talk to managers, they often got promoted, so they were domain experts and then they got promoted, so they still know something about the domain, but they know how it was 10, 15 years ago before they got promoted into management. And then they tell you either how things used to be back then, which you're probably not that interested in, or to tell you how they think things work, but not how they actually work. So that's always a bit dangerous. Plus, if you have a mixed group and there's some management and some people who actually do the work, it depends on the company and on the culture in the company. Are you okay with talking openly about problems, for example, in the domain, when your boss sits next to you? So that's also another argument for trying to get the real domain experts and not the proxies or managers. Tron says a good example of where it may not align is for customer service. Yeah, okay, I think that refers back to the alignment part of like business capabilities and actors' perspective. Okay, yeah. So we can discuss it in your workshop at DDD Europe. Okay. Any more questions? I mean, how many people are there? Okay, it's probably too many people to open or to talk to each other directly. So I guess what I want to encourage you is it's all nice if you see the pictures and hear someone talk about it, but until you really try it, you can't really judge if it works for you or not. So I would like to encourage you to actually try it out. Maybe start just by yourself with a piece of paper, just getting familiar with the way of modeling, with the notation, model a process that you're familiar with from your company. It doesn't have to be anything specific from a domain. It can be like your deployment process, or applying for vacation, or signing up for an awesome online conference like NDC. And if you got your bearings, like how to draw the stuff, maybe team up with a colleague or a friend and try this whole interview and asking questions technique just with one person. And then if you feel confident with that, go on and actually apply it in a group setting. So that's something that has worked for many people as far as I know. Okay, if you have any more questions later on, feel free to contact me in the Slack channel. It's channel number 4. That's this channel. And as I said before, we'll post the link to the book coupon. And again, thank you for bearing with me through these technical difficulties. Yeah, happens. Okay, thanks for your patience, and enjoy the rest of your NDC.